I know he's here. I can feel it. I hope he can't hear my heart, but I'm sure he can, as it is certainly beating loud enough for anyone within a few miles to hear. My heart and the light breathing seem to be the only things making any sort of noise in the house. The house itself seems too frightened to even feign any sort of commotion, as if he is whispering the same fair warning to the house as he is to me. Don't wake up. Maybe it's all in my head. I mean, I've heard of insomnia, and I suppose some sort of opposing complication must exist. The inability to wake up. A cold breeze enters through the slight cracks in my room's door, and I know he's back to once again watch me pretend to slumber. How long has it been now? How long have I now been in the cold sweats hoping he still supposes me asleep? How long have I been here with my eyes clamped shut, alone with only a few frightened and desperate thoughts to keep me company? It feels as if it has been days since I heard a cold whisper in my ear, and even longer since I last opened my eyes. And now I just sit here wondering if the rest of the world has faced this cold demon. I sit here and ask myself whether I could have done something to prevent this, or at the very least if I could have done more with the days I had been given. I had always wanted to be someone important, but now, in this desperate state, my life may very well be taken by whomever, or more likely, whatever this beast may be, and the worst part of all of this is that nary a soul will care. Darkness is still all there is. The fact that it's still perfectly dark out is the only indication that days, or perhaps years, have not passed. Something about the darkness also tells me that my tormentor still lies in this very room, for there is something quite unnatural about this darkness, as if it is not there due to the lack of light, rather the presence of some sort of dark essence. My motionless body faces the emptiness of the room, rather than the emptiness outside of the window. The numbness of fear has begun to wear off, and my limbs beg for oxygen. I shift my position in the slightest, and I feel a wicked grin come across the face of the beast, as if I had completed the first step to giving in. I hear a faint hiss, and imagine he is speaking to himself, maybe commenting on the weakness of all his prey, or possibly praising how long I have stayed motionless thus far and preparing himself for a good fight. I feel the cold presence slither silently out of the room, and I release a small sigh in my exuberance. For what feels like hours, I continue to lay still, attempting to change positions in the slightest occasionally, but still remaining motionless as long as I may. After the constant torment of boredom, I hear a voice, not one belonging to my tormentor, rather my mother, calling, "Honey, wake up." I become confused, and I think my persecution may have come to an abrupt halt. But then I remember, even in my sleep-deprived state, that I have been living alone for the past 3 years. As if to answer this question, she continues, "I used the spare key door to get in. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to be sure you were ready for your first day of your new job." This made as much sense as it needed to, and I supposed that it was only dark for how early it was in the morning, so I prepared to step out of my bed when I felt the same cold presence as earlier and froze completely. I became suddenly aware that this was but another ruse of the demon, or perhaps I thought my mother had come in earlier and was unaware of my torment. The latter supposition was soon discarded, however, as I realized I would have heard even the slightest sound of a door in this frozen house. The chill lasted for a few minutes longer until I felt a scowl come across the face of the beast. I heard his body scratch against my floor, and the chill of the room grew to a point where I could no longer remember what the warmth of my comforter on my sleeping body felt like. A finger, cold and hard, though not entirely inhuman, pressed against my stiff body. Again, the demon spoke, mocking my mother's voice. "Sweetie." I felt a smile upon the beast's face. "You need to get up. I made coffee." As if responding to the command of the demon's words, a tempting draft of the aroma of a freshly brewed pot of coffee rushed into my room. This, I'll admit, was the hardest moment of the night thus far, as living alone had driven me to grow fonder and fonder of the bitter bean, to the point where I had to force myself now to remain motionless, convincing myself that, in the long run, coffee is not worth death or whatever punishment this beast prepared for me. After a good half hour, the demon audibly scowled and slithered out of the room, leaving me alone with my agitated, fearful thoughts. Not 10 minutes later did I hear heavy footsteps enter the room, followed closely by a familiar chill and a familiar dread. For the first time, then did I hear the voice of my heretofore silent tormentor, presenting to me an entirely unexpected benediction. The words, "You are not the weakest soul I've encountered," crawled out of his throat. "Your perseverance has paid off," he continued. "The only scar I shall therefore leave you with is the memory of fear and dread of tonight." And with those words, the chill left my room with the beast. Although it is unnecessary, to be safest, I think I will remain in my bed for a while longer. I know I must get up soon, but with the dim light of dawn creeping through my window, and the coppery smell of blood still haunting my room, I cannot keep myself from doing anything but staring at the mangled wreck of my mother's body lying at the foot of my bed. There was nothing special about that day. I had woken up, gotten dressed, and hurried along to work just like I did any other day of the week. I was locked in combat against my insomnia, staring blankly at my many Excel spreadsheets as I took another sip of coffee from my corner cubicle on the 8th floor. I forced the bitter gunk down my throat, hoping between coughs it would give me the strength to not go postal on my coworkers. Lifting my head, my eyes scanned across the low cubicle walls to see each zombie-like face mulling over their work. With a heavy breath, I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. My stomach was tightening, and my bladder felt full. I decided to hold out for a little while and turned up my music, clinging to some arbitrary belief that it would help me fight the urge to go. The mice in the office went click, click, click. My fingers danced unenthusiastically across the keyboard, spending more time on the backspace key than any other. Copy. Paste special values. Double-click the little black box. Repeat. I had to close my eyes for a moment to look at something, anything that didn't give off artificial light. Eventually, upon finishing my 5th spreadsheet of the day, I looked at the tiny clock on the screen. It read 9:49 a.m. My foot began tapping anxiously, a common habit of mine. I wasn't going to be able to make it through another 6 hours of this monotony. I groaned painfully. At the rate I was going, I wasn't going to have the other 30 spreadsheets finished before the end of the day. A notification popped up on my screen. It was my day scheduler. I had a phone meeting in 10 minutes. I continued to grind out the next spreadsheet for a few minutes. When the time drew near for the meeting to start, I reached for my telephone and called onto the line. I could hear it connecting for a moment before it suddenly cut out. Puzzled, I looked at the receiver, then the box it was connected to. Nothing seemed out of place. Leaning down, I followed the phone's wires behind and below my desk. There was the cause. I had pulled out the power cord while I was tapping my foot. Either that or one of the janitors had while cleaning. I took the cord in hand and pushed it back into its slot. I noticed that the office immediately went dark the moment I plugged my phone back in. Thinking I had just somehow caused a blackout, I stood up to see the ensuing chaos. Every desk was empty and everything was gray. There was no sounds to be heard. The gypsum walls were cracked and ruined, and pieces of plaster fell from the ceiling. There was an ominous fog drifting over the ripped and ragged carpet, swallowing my legs up to the knees. Now my heart was racing. I raised my shaky hands and could see the dingy carpet floor through them. Not in between my fingers, but through my palms. The chill came next, a cold wind that struck suddenly, like a stabbing from Jack Frost. My head flew up in the direction the sensation had come from, and I saw it. Swearing under my breath, I ducked behind a desk, stupidly hoping it hadn't seen me. I closed my eyes and prayed that this was all just some stress-induced hallucination, or that I had simply fallen asleep at my desk. Once neither proved to be true, I found my balls and decided to slowly stand and get a better look at the thing. A dark cloaked figure stared in my direction from the other end of the office. Its face was impossible to see, hidden in the shade of its hood, but I could make out the rusted farming tool it wielded, as well as the bony finger it raised towards me before advancing on my position. My heart sunk in despair before escalating to new levels of fright. I bolted from my desk and began to run down the floor towards the exit, but it was as though I were on a treadmill. My feet just would not grip, and I found myself using a lot of energy to only get a few feet away. I turned around and witnessed a group of ghastly chains protruding from my back, hooking me to my seat, and lying there was my body, limp and quiet, one hand smoldering from where the socket had fried me. I rushed back over to my desk, an easier task as I was not fighting the chains. I tried reaching into the heart, the brain, anywhere I thought was spiritually important. I turned back for a second. The cloaked thing was halfway across the floor, holding the scythe in both hands. I couldn't tell if it had feet or not, as it seemed to glide over the filthy gray floor. I tried to put the plug back in its socket to complete some unfinished business. I screamed and shouted at my body. I slapped it and pinched it and punched it. I threw drywall and coffee cups in its face. Nothing worked. The chill had grown with the creature's approach, and my limbs felt hard and slow to move. I stumbled back, begging for the thing to let me go. I knew what it was, but I wasn't ready. The silent being raised the rusted tool high above its wispy cloaked head. The thought of fighting back and grabbing its skeletal arms crossed my mind, but I could barely move as it was from the cold and my own dread. The creature jerked, and I fell back, once again in pure fright, landing in the chair just as the blade came slashing down. I sucked in a large breath and coughed hard, trying to obtain the sweet oxygen from the air. The lights had returned, passing overhead rather quickly, and I felt a fierce, stinging pain in my right hand. I tried to turn my head on the pillow to see. Wait, pillow? Slowly, the faces of multiple white-gowned hospital workers came into view. I could hear them saying something about sudden cardiac arrest, yet none of them noticed my returning consciousness. Perhaps I wasn't truly conscious, though. I couldn't tell. Maybe I was just a soul watching from my body's eyes. There was a loud crash as the bottom of my bed was forced through a large pair of double doors. Doctors rushed around my bed, panicked to resuscitate my body. As for me, I just laid there, realizing there was no escaping this. Staring past the professionals, I watched in horror as a cloaked figure approached me from the corner of the room. Let me start by saying that my parents murdered someone. They've murdered at least one person every year on my birthday. They always made a big deal out of my birthday. It's a special day, they'd say, and it was the one day a year I could get anything I wanted. Did I want to have a big sleepover party with all of my friends? Done. Take 20 people to a movie? Sure. Go horseback riding? Of course. When I was in middle school, I thought it was because they felt sorry for me, because I'm the dumb, weak, and perpetually sick child. Now that I'm in high school, having just celebrated my 18th birthday, I know better. It's guilt. I found out because I wasn't sleeping the night before my birthday. I had gotten yet another college rejection letter, and it was starting to look like I wouldn't be going to college at all. How could I, when I struggled just to get C's? Meanwhile, my younger brother was taking a heavy load of AP classes as a sophomore and pulling a 4.8 GPA. My sister was in her final year of middle school and had opted into high school classes to get a head start. She walked over to my school every day in the afternoon, and I felt embarrassed seeing her in the hallway, knowing she was acing classes in 8th grade that I'd barely survived in 10th. I wasn't even applying to prestigious schools. I was applying to something state university out in the middle of nowhere with a student population of like 12 people. So after the last rejection, I spent the night crying to myself. I'd hoped that I'd wear myself out and fall asleep that way, but every time I stopped crying long enough to think, I'd drift off. I'd think about how my brother just gotten an internship at a tech company as a high schooler, and here I was thinking I'd just wind up at a trade school learning to cut people's hair or something, and I'd start crying all over again. My parents told me it didn't matter what I grew up to be, so long as I was a good person that I was happy. And I guess that's true. I could be happy without being a doctor or a lawyer. However, when your siblings are so talented, it's hard not to feel like a failure to your whole family. It's not just academics either. I'm a lot frailer than them. I get sick all the time. I've missed so much school that my parents had to work out an arrangement with the school district so I could do classwork at home while I was recuperating from my slew of illnesses. I even get sick with things a normal person shouldn't even get. Did you ever know the MMR vaccine is only 78% effective for preventing mumps? Guess how I know this? I feel a little lucky in that the vaccine at least makes the symptoms less severe, because as it was, I couldn't eat anything that wasn't through a straw for 3 days. I can't imagine what it would have been like at full strength. My brother used to make fun of me, saying I was the practice run for Mom and Dad, that they screwed me up so they could get other kids right. Mom and Dad put a stop to that real fast when they found out. My brother had to do all of my chores for me for a month. That was many years ago. He feels bad about it now. At least I'm not bullied about being so much less than my siblings. The school takes its cues from my brother because he's on the football team, and he's handsome and talented, and he's really nice to me. So everyone else is too. And my sister is shaping up to be a track prodigy, and she's nice as well. So I've got that going for me at least. It's still embarrassing. I'm the eldest, and yet I feel like my younger siblings are looking out for me, not vice versa. All of this was running through my head on the eve of my birthday, and that's why I was still awake when midnight rolled around. I watched the clock, counting the minutes, until the clock turned over to 12:12. Happy birthday, I whispered to myself. I was born 12 minutes after midnight, and no sooner had I said this than I heard what sounded like a scream. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. It had been muffled, but it had been close, like it was in the house. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. It had been muffled, but it had been close, like it was inside the house. Sound carried through the vents, and sometimes conversations from the basement could make it all the way up to the second floor. I remained perfectly still, listening intently, and from the wall where the vent sat I could hear more noises. Voices. My father, and he sounded angry. I got out of bed and went to the stairs. I made my way down them, carefully placing my weight near the wall so they wouldn't creak. I continued through the house until I reached the top of the basement stairs. The door was slightly ajar, and I edged it further open. A sliver of light spilled out into the kitchen where I crouched. I heard the muted voices of my parents and another sound, a wet, tearing sort of noise. I was trembling in fear, but I told myself, it's my parents. I didn't need to be afraid. Maybe they were up because they were getting something ready for my birthday. I could go down there, and if it ruined some sort of surprise, well, I could tell them I was upset because of college rejection letters, and they'd understand, and maybe I could just stay up and talk with my mom and dad, and maybe that would make me feel better. I moved slowly, one step at a time. The basement was open, and about halfway down the stairs, the wall from the floor above vanished. I stopped just short of this point and leaned forwards, steadying myself with the railing so that I could peer underneath the ceiling without being visible myself. Half of the basement had been cleared of everything, and plastic covered the walls and floors. A man lay on his back in the middle of it, arms wrenched behind his body, swimming in a pool of his own blood. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, and his chest was cut open. My brother was in AP biology. He said they dissected fetal pigs, and he described it to me over dinner to gross me out. He said that they'd peeled the skin and muscle first, then cut the ribs from the sternum and broke them, to expose the organs for removal. He had thrown the heart at another classmate when the teacher wasn't looking. That's what the man reminded me of, except there was so much blood. I covered my mouth and nose with my hand, trying to take shallow breaths so I didn't have to smell it. I felt like I was going to vomit. My parents stood off to the side, arguing in low voices. My mother was wiping blood off her arms with a rag. It was smeared up to her elbows. Dad was cross that the man had managed to scream. Mom hadn't tied the gag tight enough, he was saying. Did she use a square knot like he told her, just like he told her every year? My dad gets a little particular about small things like this. It's an annoying quirk that we all just tolerate. There was someone else with them, someone I didn't recognize. A man stood beside the dead man, licking blood off his fingers. He was tall, thin, and well-dressed in tight jeans and an untucked charcoal button-down that looked very expensive. Well, that was delicious, the strange man sighed contentedly. Until next year, then? He moved to the basement sink to finish washing the blood off his hands. My parents began untacking the plastic from the walls, rolling it inward so that none of the blood escaped. I needed to leave. I realized before someone came upstairs. I used the cover of the tap running to creak back to my room unheard. My parents had murdered someone. I paced the length of my bedroom, cell phone in hand, wondering what I should do. Should I flee the house? Call the police? Do nothing? My breath came in short, panicked gasps, and in my agitation I didn't notice my bedroom door edge open until the man was in the room. I turned and he lunged. One hand grabbed me by the back of the neck, holding me in place. His other went over my mouth. I made a small, muffled noise of panic, and grabbed at his wrists, but I'd always been weak, and it was like trying to budge a tree. "Shh, shh, shh, shh," he quickly whispered in an undertone. "Don't cry out. I know you were listening at the top of the stairs. Your parents won't like that you saw. Here, come with me, and let's go for a walk." He steered me to the hallway. I think my mind sort of shut down at that point. I could smell blood on him, and there was another sickly scent, like sulfur and sandalwood, and it made me want to gag. He walked quickly, and I was surprised that the stairs did not creak as we descended. Even though he was hurrying, the front door was similarly silent. He released me once we were out of eyeshot of the house. His pace slowed that I could keep up, and he walked calmly down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, and I walked beside him. It seems I wasn't actually being abducted, so... "I'm sure you have lots of questions," he said calmly. "I'll explain so you don't feel compelled to do something dumb in search of answers. Let me first answer the most important question, the one you won't think to ask but have been asking yourself for your entire life. It's not your fault that you're the least of your siblings. It's because you're their sacrificial lamb." What? "We made a bargain," he continued. "They give me a human heart every year to devour. I don't care whose. In exchange, all of your potential and ability is given to your siblings, and you get all their weakness and defects. Sacrifice the one for the good of the others." I laughed weakly. This was absurd. He paused, pivoting smoothly to face me, serene and collected, his hands still in his pockets. There was a thin smile on his face, and his eyes seemed to draw me in. I couldn't look away. And I saw something. I can barely describe it. Like I was falling, and there was darkness and a roaring in my ears, like wind or fire, and I felt something there with me, something vast, malicious, and ancient. He turned his head and broke eye contact, and then I was back on the sidewalk, and I was gasping with sobs. My face was wet with tears, and my body felt cold with fear. "Oh no, don't cry," he sighed. He fished in his back pocket for a handkerchief and handed it to me. "I can't handle crying. I just wanted you to understand what I am." "And what are you?" I sniveled. He began walking again. I followed. My steps shaky, and I stumbled on a crack in the pavement. "I'm the devil." I stopped cold. "The devil?" I whispered. I was willing to believe anything at this point. His lips thinned, and he stared off into the distance, contemplating his words. "Not quite," he said slowly. "There is a devil like the one you're thinking of, but at the same time, it's also a role that can be filled by others like myself. You can think of me as the devil, but a little less powerful and a little less evil." "So are you human?" He laughed. "Goodness, no. What a wretched situation that would be. I'm not human, and I reside in hell when I'm not walking the earth." We walked a little longer, and I contemplated the implication of this arrangement. I didn't like what I came up with. "So what happens to me?" I asked softly, as we reached the end of the block. "Do I go to hell someday?" He laughed softly and turned us around, heading slowly back towards my house. "No. You are your own person. You will suffer for your parents' choices, but you aren't responsible for them." "Do I have to kill people someday?" "No. You don't have to do anything. Your parents uphold the bargain. When they die, I get their souls, and that secures the arrangement for the rest of your lives. They know this, but what parent wouldn't sacrifice everything to ensure their children grow up well? And certainly not all their children are going to be successful, but 2 out of the 3 isn't bad." "And if they don't give you a heart?" I asked, trying to ignore the sly condensation in his voice. "Things go back to the way they were supposed to be. You become average. You might be able to get into a community college someday. But your siblings? Well, track doesn't pan out for your sister. Your brother does merely okay at football tryouts next year and gets demoted to sitting on the bench. They'll get into the state university, but they won't get the scholarships they're expecting, and they graduate with as much debt as everyone else instead of debt-free. It slows down their ability to get married and buy a house, and the fact that their jobs are merely average doesn't help any either. Instead of the promising futures they're currently set on, they get average lives. Is that what you want? Would that feel like revenge for all these years of being inadequate?" He stopped walking and turned to look at me, his dark eyes fixed on mine. It was like he was staring into my thoughts. How was I thinking that all it would take was one phone call to the police on the eve of my birthday, and my parents would go to jail for attempted murder, and the bargain would be broken? He hadn't taken me for a walk to explain what was wrong with me out of pity. He'd done it because he was the devil, and he was here to tempt me, to dangle in front of me what I'd always wanted, to be like my siblings, in the hopes that I would destroy everyone I loved. Is it destruction, though? Isn't it just restoring the world back to the way it should have been? Why did I have to sacrifice everything? I put my hands over my ears and walked away from him. I don't know if he tried to follow me, but I called back to him that I was done here, and that I'd see myself home and I never wanted to see him again. Just before I reached home, I cut into the neighbor's yard and watched the house from behind the bushes along the fence. The kitchen lights were on inside, and after a few minutes they went out. The garage door opened and the minivan backed out, my father driving, my mother in the passenger seat. The body would be in the back, wrapped in so much plastic, to be disposed of in whatever way they'd made work for the past 18 years, or however long this bargain had been going on. I waited until the car was gone, and then I quietly entered the house. I went down into the basement and stared at the area they'd cleaned out. A strong smell of bleach hung in the air, blotting out the tang of fresh blood. There was no indication that someone had died down here. I went back to my room and lay awake in bed until morning. It was difficult to pretend to be excited for my birthday the next day. I told my parents that I was still upset about the college rejection letter, and my mom hugged me and said it was okay, that no matter what I was going to be just fine. I didn't need to go to a prestigious college. I didn't need to go to any college if I didn't want to. I shrugged her off. I didn't want her touching me. All I could think about was how she had blood all the way up to her elbows. Was she the one that cut open the man's chest and pulled his heart out? I'm so confused. I don't know what to do. My parents are killing people, and surely that alone means I need to call the police on them. But what kind of person sends their own parents to jail? Would my siblings thank me? Would they hate me? And if they knew what the yearly sacrifice was doing, would they hate me even more for taking away everything they're good at and ruining their futures? Their success is brought with blood. Would they want it if they knew the cost? The life of a stranger every year, and the sacrifice of their older sister? Their slow, stupid, and sick sister that they pity? I could lose my whole family, or I could stay silent, give them everything they want, and damn myself in the process. I have a year to decide what to do.